Part 1 expanded. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the dusty streets of Red River Gulch. The town was a forgotten scar on the vast expanse of the Wild West, where wind howled through empty alleys and the creak of weathered signs was the only music. Inside the saloon, however, the air was thick with tension, smoke, and the acrid smell of whiskey. Patrons had gone silent, sensing the storm about to erupt. Maria Delgado sat in the center of the room, bound to a wooden chair with thick rope biting into her wrists. Her once pristine dress was streaked with dust and sweat, and the traces of tears on her face had dried into faint, dark lines. She lifted her chin defiantly, refusing to let fear mark her eyes. Across from her, Javier Cortez paced like a caged predator. The notorious outlaw was known throughout the territory for his cruelty, and tonight, his reputation lived up to its fearsome reputation. 10 minutes, Javier sneered, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. He slammed his revolver down onto the bar with a deafening clang, the metallic echo bouncing off the walls and making Maria flinch. 10 minutes, Delgado. That's all the time you've got before your little soul rides straight to hell. Maria's pulse raced, each heartbeat a drum in her ears. Her mind raced faster than the dusty winds outside. She knew the odds were stacked against her, that no ordinary soul in Red River Gulch would dare intervene. Yet she also had a stubborn streak, the kind that had kept her alive through years of hardship. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't plead. Not for Javier, not for anyone. The saloon door creaked slightly with the wind, and Maria's sharp ears picked up a faint sound, a rhythm that didn't belong to the ordinary bustle of the town. The soft rattle of hooves on wooden planks grew louder, deliberate, and relentless. Javier stopped mid-step, his sneer faltering as he turned toward the door. The saloon doors burst open with a sudden, dramatic force, letting in a gust of the cool evening air that swept through the room. Dust swirled around the entrance, lit by the dying rays of the sun. There, silhouetted against the amber sky, rode a lone figure, a cowboy astride a chestnut stallion. His hat was pulled low over his face, shadowing his eyes, but even from a distance, he radiated the calm, unshakable confidence of a man who had faced danger and emerged unscathed. The patrons whispered among themselves, hardly daring to breathe. Some recognized him immediately. Colt McGraw, a name that carried weight across the territory, whispered with awe in towns and camps alike. He was the man who had defied impossible odds, rescued the hopeless, and disappeared before anyone could ask him a single question. A legend wrapped in dust and leather, arriving exactly when he was needed most. Colt's horse stomped once, impatient, as the cowboy adjusted his grip on the reins. He dismounted with a grace that seemed almost impossible, boots thudding against the saloon's worn wooden floor. Every eye in the room followed him, drawn to the quiet authority in his stance, the way he seemed to command not just attention but the very air around him. Javier, momentarily stunned, straightened and tried to regain his menacing posture. Well, he muttered through clenched teeth, looks like someone wants to play hero. His hand drifted toward his revolver, but the grin faltered as Colt's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. Maria felt something she hadn't in hours, hope. Her pulse quickened not from fear but from the possibility of survival. This cowboy, this stranger riding into the sunset as if he belonged there, was her only chance. And yet, she knew better than to assume he would risk his life for just anyone. There had to be a reason he had come, a purpose tied to her fate. Colt took deliberate steps forward, each one measured, controlled. He didn't rush, didn't flinch at Javier's words or threats. The room seemed to shrink around him, every detail of the saloon, every barrel, every chair, every shadow, focused on this singular moment. Time stretched. 10 minutes, Maria thought grimly, might not even be enough. Part 2 expanded. Colt McGraw's boots clicked against the worn wooden floor of the saloon, a steady rhythm that cut through the silence like a heartbeat. He stopped just a few feet from Javier Cortez, and for a moment, the outlaw's confidence seemed unshakable. Let her go, Javier, Colt said, his voice low, steady, and commanding, carrying a weight that made even the bravest men pause. Javier laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that scraped against the walls. Or what? He snapped, taking a step closer. You gonna shoot me, cowboy? You think you can stop me after all the lives I've taken? His revolver gleamed in the fading light, a menacing promise of death. The patrons held their breath, frozen between fear and awe. Maria's heart pounded as she shifted slightly in her chair, her eyes darting between the two men. Colt's hand hovered near his holster, but it wasn't just the gun that made Javier hesitate, it was the certainty in Colt's stance, the way he carried himself like a man who had faced every danger imaginable and won. His eyes, sharp and unflinching, locked onto Javier's, and for the first time, the outlaw felt uncertainty. The air seemed to thrum with tension, each second stretching into an eternity. "You don't know me, Javier," Colt said, his tone calm but deadly. "But I don't leave people to die if I can help it. And I don't lose." Javier's sneer wavered, but he quickly masked it with a bark of laughter. "Big words for a man standing in front of me. Let's see if you can back them up." He raised his revolver and fired, the crack of the gunshot splitting the air. Dust and splinters exploded from the bar as the bullet struck the wood. Colt had already moved, a blur of motion, his own revolver rising in a flash. The shots rang out in rapid succession, echoing through the canyon outside as if the entire world held its breath. Colt's aim was precise, his movements fluid and practiced, while Javier's desperation made him reckless. Each time Javier fired, Colt sidestepped or ducked, letting the outlaw's bullets graze harmlessly past. The townsfolk ducked behind barrels and tables, wide-eyed as the dance of death played out before them. Maria struggled against her ropes, panic clawing at her chest. Colt's movements were a blur now, moving between Javier and her like a guardian spirit. With a swift motion, he drew a knife from his belt and cut through the thick ropes binding her wrists. Quickly, he whispered, his eyes scanning for threats. Maria's hands were free, trembling but alive, and she rose to her feet with his guidance. Javier cursed under his breath, realizing the tide was turning. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted, firing wildly, but Colt anticipated every move, deflecting bullets with uncanny precision. The outlaw's confidence, so carefully cultivated over years of terror, began to crumble. Colt's presence was like a force of nature, unstoppable, relentless, and deadly. With a final, desperate charge, Javier lunged at Maria, aiming to end her life before Colt could stop him. Colt reacted instantly, stepping into Javier's path with a calm fury. The outlaw never saw the shot coming. Colt's revolver barked once, and Javier went down with a heavy thud, sprawling across the floor. Silence fell immediately, broken only by the shallow, ragged breathing of those who had witnessed the impossible. Maria sank to her knees, the adrenaline leaving her body in a rush of relief. Colt's eyes softened as he knelt beside her, checking for injuries. "You're okay," he said, almost as if saying it aloud made it real. "You're safe now." She nodded, unable to find her voice, tears streaming freely down her face. The fear that had gripped her for hours melted into a profound, overwhelming gratitude. The townsfolk slowly emerged from their hiding places, their eyes wide with awe and disbelief. Whispers of Colt McGraw's heroics spread like wildfire, each person recounting the events as if they had witnessed a miracle. Yet Colt remained focused on Maria, ensuring she was unharmed, keeping his presence a shield against any lingering danger. For a brief moment, the world outside the saloon seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, hearts pounding, breaths heavy, and the remnants of violence scattered across the floor. Maria finally found her voice, her whisper barely audible, "Thank you, for saving me." Colt tipped his hat back, a faint smile touching his rugged features. "Just doing what had to be done," he said. "No one deserves to be left for dead, not while I Part 3 expanded." The saloon was quiet now, the echoes of gunfire lingering like ghosts in the dim light. Dust floated lazily in the golden glow of the setting sun, settling over overturned chairs, shattered bottles, and the still figure of Javier Cortez, finally silenced. Colt McGraw stood beside Maria, boots planted firmly on the creaking floorboards, his chest heaving slightly from the exertion. Despite the violence that had just erupted, there was a calm in him, a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate strength and protection. Maria's hands still trembled, not from fear but from the release of tension. She had been moments away from losing everything, and now she was alive, free, and standing before the man who had made it possible. You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft creak of the saloon door swinging in the wind. Colt tipped his hat back, letting the sun catch the rugged lines of his face. His eyes, sharp and steady, softened as they met hers. "Wasn't much of a choice," he said quietly. "A man doesn't leave a lady to her fate if he can help it." His voice carried the weight of experience, of a life spent facing impossible odds and emerging on the other side. Maria felt the words settle deep within her, a warmth that reached into the shadows of fear that had gripped her heart. For a moment, neither spoke. The town's few remaining patrons emerged cautiously from behind tables and barrels, wide-eyed and whispering in awe at the sight before them. Colt and Maria, standing amid the aftermath of violence, looked almost like legends brought to life, two figures etched against the fiery backdrop of the setting sun. Stories would be told of this day, of how Colt McGraw had ridden in to reclaim a life from the edge of death. But for now, it was just them, breathing in the silence, the dust, and the golden glow of freedom. Colt gestured toward the door, and Maria followed him outside. The canyon stretched before them, wide and endless, painted in hues of gold, orange, and crimson. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dry earth, a reminder that life continued beyond the walls of Red River Gulch. Colt swung himself onto his horse with ease, then offered Maria the reins of a second saddle he had brought along. Hesitation flickered across her face, but the glimmer of trust, born from survival, gave her the courage to climb up behind him. The stallion snorted, pawing at the ground impatiently, as if sensing the urgency of departure. Colt urged him forward, and they rode into the fading light, dust rising in a golden cloud around them. With each powerful stride, the town behind them seemed to shrink, leaving only the open expanse of plains and the promise of a new beginning. Maria clung lightly to Colt, her heart still racing but steadier now, and she could feel the steady beat of his horse beneath them, a rhythm that matched her own awakening pulse. As they rode, Colt glanced at her, his expression unreadable yet filled with an unspoken promise of protection. "Red River Gulch will remember tonight," he said softly. "And so will you." Maria allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I don't think I'll ever forget," she replied. "Not just the danger, but you." Colt's gaze met hers for a moment longer, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. In the Wild West, connections were often fleeting, forged in dust, danger, and fleeting glances. But some were different, lasting, indelible, shaping the course of the lives they touched. Maria knew this was one of those rare moments. Colt McGraw wasn't just a hero, he was the man who had reclaimed her fate, who had given her life back when it had been stripped away in a matter of minutes. The sun finally sank below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and fiery reds. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying their silhouettes forward, two figures against an endless expanse of plains and possibilities. Maria leaned slightly against Colt, letting the warmth of his presence fill the void left by fear and uncertainty. She had faced death and lived, and in doing so, had discovered something more: courage, hope, and the quiet power of trust. As night fell, the first stars appeared, blinking softly in the vast sky. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a canvas for new beginnings and untold adventures. Colt's horse picked up the pace, and Maria felt the exhilaration of the ride, the thrill of escaping the shadows of Red River Gulch, and the undeniable sense that life, for the first time in days, was entirely hers to shape. In the distance, the faint glow of a campfire marked a place of rest, of safety, and perhaps the start of something more. Maria tightened her hold on Colt, not just for balance, but for the unspoken bond that had formed in the crucible of danger. The cowboy who had ridden into legend had become the man who reclaimed her life. And as the dust settled behind them and the night embraced the western plains, Maria knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was free, she was alive, and nothing, not even the ruthless hands of fate, could ever take that away. Around